Hi, Kristen, thanks. I'm happy to kick things off. First of all, I love the Nevada presentation. It was like everything I was hoping for from this event. So thank you so much, Jennifer and others. So I'll just quickly introduce myself. I do federal affairs for Schneider Electric. I'm not sure if you've heard of us, but we are a global energy management company. We have deployed over 300 microgrids in the United States, and we have been closely following BRIC. We've been involved with the comment process with the agency and speaking to Camille Crane at BRIC to think more about how innovative solutions can scale. So BRIC has been a very central part of my life, especially during the last years of the pandemic. So the central question that I have is around the cost share, which I think is kind of everybody's question. And, I don't want to speak for just Schneider Electric. I've talked to other sort of private sector actors, and we all want to understand how we can come in on the cost share piece. I understand that, there's a lot of different things that can be done from scoping to deployment, but I'd love to understand how you went through that process and any lessons learned, and how you feel like maybe the private sector can come in and be more supportive, because it is just the first year of the program. So we're all navigating it and trying to figure out how we can better interface with folks at the state and local level. So thank you for your time, and hopefully others have that question too.
I'll kick it off. Hi, Mona. Thanks for the question. Thanks for the kind words on our presentation. So our projects are right now, they're scoping. And so we will be going into a process for how we get the information that we need for the submission of a future infrastructure project. I know that the cost share obviously is an important piece of this. And again, for this just cost, the first round of scoping, we were so fortunate to have UMC be able to meet that commitment, and for City of Reno, and also just guys, so you know, Suzanne had to step off and Janelle had to step off. But if anyone has questions for either of them, I'm happy to you'll get their emails in the presentations. But I think that the private sector has a great role to play in potentially looking at how things scale, looking at how they might be able to support cost-effective solutions to the infrastructure projects, and being able to bring your wisdom about what's going on in the market to the discussions with the local governments and state governments. I know that with the hazard mitigation project that I referenced for City of Las Vegas, it was HMGP state allocation money. There was no BCA that we had to deal with. Well, there was a BCA, sorry. There was no competitive criteria that we had to deal with, which is a whole other issue. But when we got into the BCA, we were working with a company that had expertise in engineering, but not necessarily expertise in the microgrids. And so possibly the opportunity to have input from folks like Schneider and other companies in whatever the process is for that local government, have them bring in like their expertise on, on the engineering, on the capacity building, on the structural issues that might need to be upgraded. All those kinds of things will make it easier, I think, when those projects start to go forward, so that we know that, this is absolutely like baked in, this is the cost, now we need to figure out the BCA. And I think that could be a way to be helpful from the perspective of Jody and Carissa, who have done capital improvement projects and have done that type of work. I'd love to have them weigh in too if they have additional thoughts. Not to put you guys on the spot, but I know, Carissa, you've got all kinds of big, huge projects that you work with private sector on.
We do. We don't always have private sector funding involvement, though. And as everyone here knows, there's some fine lines about how you can make it joint. But that being said, yes, and this project also is going to have to be bid out. This is going to be one that is clearly in the state of Nevada, it's going to be a public works project, and it would have to be bid out. So if your team was going to bid on it, I would say you cannot be involved in anything prior to that bid. So just keep that in mind. I mean, I want to take your help as much as possible, but I also don't want to preclude you from being able to bid. So you could either be a consultant and support us as a professional consultant prior to the bid process for the actual work, to help us with cost estimating, to help us with anything else that's related on the professional side. But if you would like to bid on the public works of doing it, then we have to have that line drawn pretty much now, and then there's no involvement between us and you until that point. And I don't mean to sound harsh, but I don't want to, cause any issues again that would preclude you from getting that if that was something you're interested in eventually. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, that helps a lot, because I think that one of the areas that we have been thinking through is where to get involved at that first stage, or whether at the bid stage. And because it's the first year of doing it, we have just seen recent guidance from FEMA around microgrids, and we're going to go back to them and talk to them a little bit more about that. I think one of the other issues too is that there are a lot of different innovative models now in the private sector around deployment of large scale projects. So for instance, there are models where a company can come in at no upfront cost to the community. We've deployed a microgrid from that way, and then did a long-term contract. And that's helped scale to have multiple microgrids in a community or state. So these are all just issues that we're trying to work through to understand how that might interface with BRIC. So I just say that quickly because energy as a service and infrastructure as a service and some of these other concepts around large scale infrastructure financing are emerging, and we're hoping that we can, find a way through the BRIC program to help states and localities with thinking about how they can scale. So I don't want to take up all the time on this breakout room, so I'm happy to follow up with some of that information if there's interest.
Yeah, thanks, Carissa, for giving the procurement, requirements, because that's not always necessary, at least something in our space. And so I really appreciate your delineating that.
Great. Other question. I know that Gary in the chat has noted that he believes that provided an entity providing professional services, whether engineering, design, or consulting, was competitively procured, they can participate in certain situations, and FEMA has developed a fact sheet on how to leverage consulting support during application development. So that's really helpful. We'll make that available to people. Carissa, if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, we can take a look at it, but what it would depend on is who's funding most of the project. If it's a federally funded project, the entire project, we have federal rules, but if the state of Nevada is significantly involved, or an entity within Nevada, then that's where the Nevada rules come into play. So it would really be dependent on how this is funded, if that helps answer that question. With Nevada, we cannot merge that unless there was something that was not under the guise of a public works to the state of Nevada.
Great, thank you for that clarification. And clearly there's a lot of federal and state, procedures to follow. So even if you're good on one, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're following the other one. So that's definitely important to note. Any other questions that people have for the Nevada team?
I have a question. First off, I appreciate the presentation. I'm curious as to, most of these projects were scoping in nature, so they weren't going to be implementation. I would imagine that implementation projects will be submitted through the grant program in FY21 or potentially in FY22 whenever you finish your deliverables for your scoping projects. But as you approach the benefit cost analysis process, are you simply providing loss of function benefits quantitatively within the BCA, the FEMA Toolkit version 6.0, or are there other benefits that you guys are realizing or capturing as you develop benefit cost analyses? And again, thank you guys for the time and the presentation.
So because this was scoping, Gary, we didn't on either of these two projects really dive into BCA. And obviously looking at BCA as a component of what will be needed when this gets submitted as a project as required by BRIC. will be something that the teams will have to do. I know that when I was trying to put together the HMGP grant for the city of Las Vegas, there were a lot of components we were trying to look at that would get us to a BCA calculation, and that's another area where there are going to have to be a lot of relationships developed to get the data. So when you look at some of the components like potential loss of life, those, we know that one of the goals of this project was to have that infrastructure in place so that Carissa's amazing team can provide the resiliency to the community that's needed in the event of an emergency or a disaster. And so having them have the ability to run whatever percentage, whatever priority systems need to run to do that was what the goal of this project was, and to get that scoping done. So when we look at, what happens in Nevada in terms of heat and extreme heat and some of the accelerating heat waves that we've had from duration and temperatures, we know that heat is the largest, the natural disaster that causes the most number of deaths is heat. And so I know that trying to get that calculation from like our health district is something that I was looking at for the city of Las Vegas. And then looking at things like the replacement, and again, most of this comes from, this was really interesting, Gary, right? Because we put these projects together as scoping, and we did them in a pretty expeditious fashion. And so it's like this learning process every time we even go back and look at it. And so when I went back to the city of Las Vegas, it was a whole new learning process for that project. But, there were a lot of things that we could have baked into the BCA calculation, but it's an ongoing process between like our pipeline, our fuel disruption, our outages, loss of life, the likelihood of recurrence. How do you calculate year over year increasing drought, increasing heat waves? How do you factor in the potential that these disasters might happen or power loss might happen because of drought? And so, yes, that's one of the factors, but there were a lot of things that we're going to need to look at when we move forward. So anyway, sorry, I know it's not a fantastic answer because we haven't done the BCA calc, but thank you for the thoughts on what we need to build in.
Thanks, I appreciate it. No, seriously, that was it's interesting discussion, because I don't think, from a BRIC perspective, I don't think any of these things have actually gone to construction yet, or as a result, they haven't had to submit that BCA as a result of phase 1 deliverables for a complex project as far as FEMA would be concerned. So I'm truly interested to see if they don't issue some additional guidance or some clarification for these types of projects as they move forward into the completion of the scoping project and the implementation phase, or the phase 2 of an HMGP project. So anyway, thank you for your time.
Yeah, and just one other thing I'd add on, and Christine, you can tell me if I'm right. I think the only energy project, like microgrid project, that got pulled for further review was St. Elizabeth in Washington, D.C., right? And so I don't know what they put in and what the factors might be if they don't actually get selected for final funding. But from my recollection from talking to Campbell and from looking at stats and data, that was the only microgrid project that got pulled. So they were able to somehow come up with something that could build into the BCA, but I don't know exactly what their considerations and calculations were.
Yeah, I believe you're correct. Yes, Jennifer, I think you're right on St. Elizabeth and DC is the one microgrid project. Any other questions? And I also want to note, you kind of selected a breakout group, and I love you all having you all here, but you're also very welcome to jump to the other breakout groups if you have a Virginia question, if you have a Kentucky question, and they're more than welcome to jump to ours. But any other questions that you want to pose to the Nevada team? Jeff, I'll call on you. Thanks for raising your hand.
Hi there. Sorry. Yeah, I just popped in the meeting, so I apologize if this was asked and answered. But I had a question for Reno. I was wondering if if you could talk about your procurement for the design and engineering part of the microgrid, how that was worked, whether it was done as a sole source, it was put out to bid. And then secondly, I was kind of curious about, you have the term backup generators, and normally in most microgrids, they try to get away from backup units and run them continuously as part of operations to turn a cost center into basically a revenue source by displacing the payments that you would normally pay to the utility. Can you just talk about both of those? And if they were asked already, I apologize.
Okay, so I'm gonna have to pop in for Suzanne. She had to run. Again, this was scoping, Jeff, so we haven't done the procurement yet, and I'm sure that I know that City of Reno's got a procurement process and a sourcing process like the state. Not exactly like the state, but I'm sure they've got their own process. And I'm sorry Suzanne's not on to be able to answer that for you. As Janelle talked about with the backup generators, that's the language that's in the hazard mitigation plan. And so the thought was not to increase, upgrade, whatever generators, traditional diesel generators on that site. It was again to have an on-site generation through renewables plus a battery as backup, and to create that microgrid, that clean microgrid. One of the things that I think is important that was mentioned is that energy agencies get involved with mitigation, with their mitigation colleagues, so that there can be delineation, there can be better descriptions, there can be clarifications in those mitigation plans to support these types of projects and to support that alignment. And that's why we're really fortunate to have partnerships across the county, the county, Clark County, Washoe County, City of Reno, City of Las Vegas, UMC, all their divisions of emergency management, because this is a discussion that's happening to make sure that there's not anything fuzzy about what backup generation could mean. So that was an older plan. I'm not sure that the 2020 plan had the specificity of updates for Washoe County, but certainly at the Office of Energy, that is something we're talking about with DEM and local managers in terms of opportunities to build that language into their plans as they update or amend.
Great, thank you very much. And I think what I heard there too, just is that it was more important to match up with that plan in order to get more points in the FEMA BRIC process than it was necessarily to have the best design that you've ever seen for a microgrid out of the box. Is that kind of what?
Well, there's not, you might want to reach out to Suzanne because there's not a design yet, Jeff, but there is the NREL study she talked about that had the valuation of solar, valuation of storage. And she could probably talk to you about, that project and what's coming next. But I'm looking at the qualitative and the technical criteria. And maybe Kristen knows off the top of her head, but I don't see a specific, I don't see a specific language. I don't see specific language that says it has to align 100%. Mm-hmm. But it certainly takes out any questions if you have that alignment in your mitigation plan.
Hey, thanks so much for even trying to take that on. And I see Kirsten drop the contact info into the chat, so I will grab that and thank you.
Perfect.
Thanks. Carol, you have your hand raised. Or no longer? Oh, maybe not. Any other questions? Oh, there you are, Carol.
I'm sorry about that. I just joined the Kentucky meeting again by accident.
No problem. We welcome you to Nevada.
I am the director of the DOE's Combined Heat and Power Technical Assistance Partnership, and I cover the West, including Nevada. And I was wondering if, I was late to the breakout session, so has there been a discussion about screening opportunities at like the hospital or what have you? We provide a free technology neutral feasibility screening for microgrids, typically with a CHP backbone, to provide a robust, long duration, energy efficient solution for facilities, particularly those with thermal loads.
This is Carissa from UMC. There has not been that discussion yet. That would probably be something that would come up as part of the scoping that we're looking to do. And any resources that we can bring in, as we're going through this are going to be helpful. So I think that's something that down the road we would welcome.
Great.
Anything else to add?
I would be happy to help. And so are you the person that I would contact, Carissa, to get looped in to helping you guys out?
Either Jennifer or myself, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Great. Any other questions? And while people ponder, I have one. So Jennifer, Carissa, you kind of alluded to the fact that it's really important to have some of these conversations very much prior to any kind of application, BRIC or otherwise. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit more on like the timeline, if you're looking at the state energy offices or approaching their state hazard mitigation offices, like what would you say, a year or two more prior? What are some of the timelines people are looking at?
That's for future projects, or what was the timeline on this project?
Yeah, I mean, maybe was your timeline on this project, but also for future projects, is there, if you have any advice for state energy offices or other state agencies?
Well, let me kick to Jody for a second if she's on, so she can talk again about sort of how, what the time frame was on when I first threw this idea out to her, and then the county's timeline on projects and what the work needs to be done at the county level. I will just say quickly, these projects came together for us fairly quickly. But again, really emphasize that they were only able to happen because of existing relationships with the county, the work that we do at the county, the outreach to the SHMO, and then the fantastic partnership with UMC that we're just so looking forward to continuing. So, Jody.
And I'm sorry, Kristen, someone was popping their head in my office. Can you repeat your question?
No problem. I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on the timeline, and Jennifer kind of supplied also what has to happen on the county level in order to facilitate some of these projects. I'm just thinking, you're a state energy office, or you're a hazard mitigation officer, and you're kind of wanting to apply future rounds of BRIC. Like, what timeline are you looking at to kind of make this happen?
Okay, I gotcha. Obviously, the further ahead, the better. And it seems like, unfortunately, we're always really scrambling to get ahead of these grant opportunities. But, it really just, it kind of, I think you can all appreciate, if it just comes together. So obviously, we want to get as far ahead as possible, but, as Jennifer mentioned, in this case, we didn't have a whole lot of time, but we had spent, several months just talking about sustainability initiatives, different projects, things we like to see in the community. So a lot of the ideas have been generated. We didn't have to come up with something completely brand new. It was just a matter of pursuing those ideas, connecting with our elected officials to see if we could get support there. They connected us with the University Medical Center. And so again, it happened that it all came together. We had a couple of other ideas that we pursued. I mean, looking at backup support for fire stations, schools, and we kind of went down those lines a little bit, and they just didn't work out with, you know, the resources and availability of the people and being able to put something together. So so really, you know, I mean, even if you don't have a lot of time, I think it's still important to reach out to, you know, your community members, the cities, the counties, whoever it may be, and see if there's an opportunity, because sometimes even with short time frames, something can come together. But obviously we want all the time in the world if we can have it.
True, true. We all do that, want that for any project, really.
Yeah, and Kristen, just another quick thought. You know, as a state energy office, there's a lot of things that we participate in. We have intervened in dockets around our utilities, incentive programs. You know, we look at federal opportunities. We look at where there may be alignment with other state funding opportunities. And so I think, you know, we are all incredibly overworked and bandwidth constrained, but I think having in your head those ideas, or when you hear there's like a funding idea or funding opportunity, like make note of it and keep it in, you know, on the shelf. So, because really this all came about because NV Energy has this incentive program that will provide a fairly significant amount of money to critical infrastructure for a battery. And so like that was really where the kernel came, and it was just this incredible timing where BRIC was coming up to at least get the scoping. I mean, originally my dream was like, let's move forward with the project, but then I quickly realized that that was a much longer lead time to actually put in an infrastructure project. So we were thrilled to be able to just get the scoping project in and start that discussion. But make sure also from the energy office perspective that you know your utilities and you know what programs and opportunities they have as well.
Yeah, I think that's such a good component of it, and I think also, you know, you pivoting away from the infrastructure to the scoping, that also is so helpful. That, you know, you see a project, you think you have a great project, but then, you know, having that kind of other way of starting the project by scoping it is super helpful. So that's great. All right, I think unless there are any other questions for the Nevada team. I don't see any hand raised, going once, going twice. We'll just have you all have a longer break. So we'll kick you all back to the main room. We're gonna reconvene at 3:30. So you'll have about 25 minutes to stand up, stretch your legs, get a cup of coffee or tea or what you might want, water. And we'll start promptly again at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. All right. See you all at the breakout in the main room. Thank you all. And thank you to the Nevada team. This was great. Appreciate it.
Thank you.